Okay, cool. Yeah, so again, hello. Good morning. Yes, it is still technically morning. Good morning. Nice to see you. I'm Nathan Wellman. I know pretty much everybody, I think. Yeah. And welcome to lecture one for methodology, ways to do philosophy. The aims for today are going to be fairly simple. What I really want to do is, well, basically introduce myself and the other people who will be involved in this course, tell you a little bit about the pragmatics, and that's just the usual kind of buzzy stuff we have to do at the beginning. That's not the real interesting bit. The interesting bit is going to be when we pivot to thinking about philosophical methodology. Because really, that's what this course is about. It's how to do philosophy. And I want to talk to you about the basic idea. Hey. So when I talk to you about the basic kind of question of what philosophical methodology is, and talk about some reasons why you might think it's stupid to worry about it or think about it, why it's a waste of time, a dangerous thing for philosophers to start throwing around, given how practical we are. But also some arguments for why philosophical methodology is important, why it's actually essential for philosophers to think about philosophical methodology. And then, after kind of giving you that sales pitch, almost, I want to talk to you about analytic philosophy. So probably in the last year of your studies, maybe give or take, has everyone heard about like analytic or continental philosophy? Have those terms been bandied around much? Some. To be honest, it's better if you haven't really come across it, because I'm what many people would call a dyed-in-the-wool analytic philosopher, but I think the distinction is just one that doesn't really cut much mustard. There isn't really that much to it. But that's not how the course is structured, so I'm going to start off by trying to tell you that there is something deep and dark at the heart of analytic philosophy, and maybe some things about what I think it is, what it might be. And then I want to finish up by talking to you about the sort of planned structure for the first block, so the first half of this course. Again, the big lessons here are really going to be kind of thinking about reasons to take metaphilosophy or philosophical methodology seriously, and then some things about what analytic philosophy is, in some very vague, very vibes it out sort of way. Cool? You know the drill by this point too. If you've got questions or comments, put your hands up, we'll talk. This is very much meant to be a kind of discussion-y sort of thing between friends. I do the best I can with that sort of thing, but I am a content provider. I am not a discussant. So I'll do the best to make sure that it is a discussion, but we'll see how it goes. So let's get to the introduction in pragmatics. So the first thing to note is the course coordinator is Adriana Clavel-Vasquez. She is going to be teaching the second half of the course. The second half will be focused more on, again, to use the shutter quotes, continental philosophy. I will let her tell you more about what exactly that is. Along with Adriana, there's me. I'm Nathan. Hey. Gregor, who has recently joined. I think he joined maybe in the summer. I don't remember. Gregor's going to come along and do a guest lecture at week 4. More about that in a bit. And then, again, I mentioned Catherine. It's not clear when she might be coming back, but we'll see how that goes. I'm sort of filling in for her, at least for now, possibly for the duration. We shall see. These will be the people leading the course. What is the aim of the course? I mean, the next slide is shockingly going to be the learning goals, but the learning goals are written in the worst sort of language possible. The real aim of the course is basically to get you to think about how to do philosophy. You've got a year of doing it under your belt, and it's sometimes useful after kind of getting your hands dirty a bit to think about, like, okay, what's the best way to actually do this? And frankly, it's much better to do that after you've already done some, rather than to think about the method before you even get going. So that's really what this course is about, thinking about method. Think about how philosophy can be done, should be done. Like, what are the best ways to do philosophy? Other kind of questions that are related, maybe not quite the exact same. We can ask, what is it that we're doing when we do philosophy? So what is it as a subject? I'll talk about this question in a few minutes. As in contrast with, say, maybe literary criticism, critical analysis, natural science, psychology. What demarcates philosophy as a subject from these other subjects? And a point to make here, and I'll make it again in a few minutes, is we're thinking here about philosophy as a subject, not as a discipline. So what do you think I mean by that distinction? It was a subject rather than something like a discipline. Now the terms are a little bit fuzzy here.
Is it the concept of versus the practicing of?
Yeah, kinda. So, I mean, what I was really trying to get after was basically, let's think about whatever the hell philosophy is with like a capital P, the activity we're engaged in right now, versus how you might see it in a structure of departments in a university. And cool, we can talk about what it is that philosophers in that sort of discipline-y way, right, of like how do we divide up the university and what courses do they teach and things like this. But I'm more interested in whatever the hell capital P philosophy is. Like, what is the concept, regardless of how the actual university distributes it out. An example, I have a bunch of colleagues who work over in Eindhoven. Eindhoven doesn't have a philosophy department. Instead, they have a bunch of philosophers who work in like engineering departments. They still do philosophy, but they're not in the philosophy discipline in some sense. Do we see the difference there? We'll talk a little bit about it as we go along. So yeah, what are we doing when we do that? Philosophy. What are some different ways of doing it? And again, this is a question we can pull apart in several different ways. More on that in a second. But another way to put what we're really aiming with this course is to do what we call meta-philosophy. Yay, I love meta stuff. Basically, it's not just first order, but thinking about how the first order works. So the course is broadly divided into two parts. They correspond to the two blocks. In the first part, what we're going to do is cover analytic philosophy and analytic methodology. The shutter quotes are necessary there because, again, that's a very loose term. And in the second half, we're going to be doing the same, but for continental. More on those notions in a second. But this is just to give you a quick and dirty grip on what we're going to do. The learning goals, I'm not going to read them. This is just for completion's sake. Basically, 1 and 2 are, you're going to learn about analytic methodology. 3 and 4 are, you're going to learn about continental methodology. Yay! Okay, there, you've got the learning goals. Obviously, if you have questions about these, please feel free to let me know. More about the details will be made clear as we go along. So course materials. You know the drill by now. All of this is going to be put on the Canvas page. One thing, unfortunate thing, is readings are still very much to be determined. That is kind of filling them in as we go along. So I've got the readings set up for next week. The readings for week 3, well, half of them are there, but the other half isn't there yet. And so on and so on and so on and so on. I'm going to put them on there as soon as we can. Apologies for any confusion there. Again, it's an administrative failure on my part. I hope throw myself in the mercy of you guys to understand why that's happening. But I will be sure to let you know if there's any changes or what I'm actually asking you to do. Clear? Make sense? Fair? I'm never going to make you read like, here's 40 pages. Good luck, fuckers. It's going to be a reasonable amount. No promises on what reasonable means, but still. In each case, I'll ask you to please read the assigned material before the lectures. You know this. You've done this. You've done a year of this already. I'm not going to spend too long. If there's any additional materials, they'll be on the Canvas page. We'll make an announcement about it. You know all this. Lectures, hey, you're here, you know where it is, you know when it is, you know where it is. Wonderful. The recordings I'll put up as soon as we can. I'll also upload them to YouTube because I find that just much easier than Panopto. We'll be good. Any questions on these bits of the pragmatics? Okay. Can you tell I'm stalling a little bit for time? It's a joke. Assessment-wise, there's going to be two forms of assessment. The first is going to be a midterm exam, open questions. For those of you who did the logic course with me recently, it's going to be kind of similar to the stuff we had in the second half, right? Some open questions. We're going to try and make it very clear. I'll give you a list of the sort of questions I will ask you a couple weeks beforehand. We'll talk about the sort of questions the week before, you know how this is going to go. One thing to note, and this is beyond my control, is the exam is set, as far as I'm aware, to be on test vision. So this means that instead of handwriting your answers, you will be typing your answers. You will be given a room and one of the various computer labs where you'll go and put your answers in directly. This is really good for me because, no offense, many of your handwriting is terrible. Yeah, one thing to do before the midterm, if you don't know how to touch type, you've got 7 weeks to fucking learn. If there's any skill you should have, learn to touch type. It makes your life so much easier. The midterm exam will obviously just be on the stuff that we cover up until the midterm. In the second half of the course, there will be a written assignment. More on that just shortly. So midterm, on test vision, open questions. We have the date already. It's the 16th of October. You need to register beforehand. There'll be a resit in January, the exact same format and test vision. More on that as we get closer. The written assignment will be a critical engagement essay. This is very sketchy because Adriana will tell you more about it when we get to that part. It will be on the material in the second half, so in block 2. Broadly speaking, you're going to be asked to critically assess either phenomenology, hermeneutics, or negative dialectics from a decolonial or intersectional approach. I'll let Adriana fill you in on what those terms mean. Be about, not about, 1,500 words. It's due on the 5th of December. More information will be provided very soon. Obviously, everything will be run through the Canvas page. If there's any changes or anything, we will let you know as quickly as possible as soon as anything changes. So, before pressing on, questions on the kind of course pragmatics? Reasonably clear? Yes, please.
Could you go back one slide?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, so it's just the midterm and the assignment. Perfect.
Yeah. So just the two. There's a midterm exam and there's a written assignment. Oh, one thing. Also, this is not up to me. One thing to note is that this course is such that you have to pass both components to pass the course. So doing really well, say on the midterm, doesn't offset doing badly on the written assignment or vice versa. You need to get a 5.5 for both parts to pass, at least a 5.5. That's just how it was set, so that's the way that we're running. Make sense? I expect you probably had some other courses that were maybe the same sort of way. But again, we'll play this by ear as we go. Any other questions about the pragmatics? That's what we like to see. So let's do some actual philosophy. And the thing to start is by thinking about philosophical methodology very quickly. So maybe we can just dive straight in. What is philosophy? Almost got him to spit the apple juice out of his nose. That's good. Starting strong. What is it? Again, let's demarcate between something like the discipline versus the subject. The discipline, right, that's the thing that's basically like, which department are you in? The subject is the capital P philosophy that, you know, like Socrates and his buddies were doing. Yeah?
I guess for both, you could say it's questioning, trying to figure out for both the discipline and the subject.
I like that. It's asking questions, but I mean, everybody asks questions, right? That's certainly not going to be sufficient to kind of characterize it. Yeah, we'll walk this way. Yeah.
Well, I think it's as well as asking questions, it's also like using the ratio as a weapon to answer questions that other sciences, like theology, would answer the existence of God by reading the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, or the Quran, whereas a philosopher would use the mind to go about the same question.
But I mean, mathematicians do that sort of thing too, right? I mean, they're out there sitting, thinking about mathematical problems and using their mind to solve mathematical questions. Are they doing philosophy the subject? I mean, they're certainly not philosophy the discipline. Let's just look at the subject. Let's set the discipline bit aside, because that's for the admin people to settle.
I want to add is questions about being and truth. So like a mathematician can answer a question about math, but the philosopher will ask himself, is it real? Is it true? And I think that's the distinction.
Interesting. But I mean, don't we think that, say, natural scientists are interested in truth? Aren't they testing hypotheses?
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like testing for
That's
truth.
nomological, right? Because philosophers, they think metaphysically within logics, within like different areas, and other disciplines are more practical, more, I don't know.
I mean, I've got some mathematician friends who, God, if you call them practical, I mean. But I get it. So
Right.
before we move on, so you mentioned they use some notions like metaphysical, logical. I mean, hell, linguistics uses logic, mathematics uses logic. I hope to God that natural science and social science uses logic. Otherwise, we're in trouble, right? But this notion of metaphysical, cool. What the hell's that? That isn't just going to lead us right back to having to appeal to something like philosophy. Yeah.
Thinking about things that cannot be tested.
Interesting. Again, arguably mathematicians could fall in this camp too, right?
You can test mathematics to some degree. I mean, you can, if you want to know whether 5 times 7 equals 35, you just get 7 groups of 5 sheep, and you count all the sheep.
Nice. How about something like whether they're non-countable infinities? That's the sort of thing. I mean,
That does sound like something that philosophy would also.
yeah. Fuck. There's this sort of a blur between like the mathematicians and us. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means our jobs will be saved when they come and kill all the humanities. There was another kind of yeah.
That's to me somehow some form of art of interpretation, something like hermeneutics or something of that kind of thing, like reading in between the lines, hearing what isn't said, all that sort of things.
I like that, but I wonder if maybe. So I really enjoy art criticism. Very much enjoy reading literary criticism. I don't think literary criticism is the same thing as philosophy. Very hard for me to pin down why, but it feels like literary criticism does exactly what you were just saying. So, you can kind of see what we're doing here, right? Basically, you're throwing stuff up and I'm trying to bat it down by showing how other people do the same thing. And we can keep playing this game for as long as we want. But this is a really interesting question. And arguably, here's the fun part, this is a philosophical question. When we're thinking about it in terms of like subject, when we think about it in terms of discipline, well then it's something like a pragmatic question, right? Do we put the philosophers in the humanities department? Do we put them in the social sciences? Who's going to pay the bills? But think about the subject. This seems like a philosophical question, whatever the hell that means, because we still don't know what exactly philosophy is. But it's not a social sciences question. It's not an economics question. It's not a literary criticism question. It looks like this categorization of what philosophy is as a subject looks like it's in our ballpark. Agree? Broadly? There's a whole lot of fuzziness here. But that's okay. We got to start with something fuzzy so then we can start to get clearer and clearer and clearer. Now maybe this is kind of a bad way to go. maybe we can think about a slightly different question. Instead of thinking about what is philosophy, we can ask it in terms of what is it philosophers do? So this is sort of after what a bunch of people were gesturing at, right? We're answering it in terms of like how philosophers go about addressing their questions. What methods do they use? They think about metaphysical possibilities rather than nomological ones. They use a priori reasoning. They use something like hermeneutics. These are all tools, methods, approaches. Maybe other people do too, use these same tools, but maybe if we think about this, we can get a little bit clearer on what exactly philosophy is. So philosophical methodology is the philosophical study of the methods that capital P philosophers use. And it's worth noting that there's two different ways to think about methods here. We're going to come back to this several times, at least in the first half here, but I want to demarcate it. And I struggled a lot with the terminology, so I apologize. This is the best I could come up with. But one way to understand this question about methods, or what is philosophical methodology, is to read it in a kind of lower order way. And what I mean by that is you answer the question by saying, here are some tools philosophers use. They use thought experiments. They use computational technologies. They use simulations. They use statistical reasoning. So these are kind of tools philosophers can employ when they're answering their questions. So again, that's the kind of lower order, or first order. Contrast that with what we'll call higher order. Higher order version of this question isn't answered by saying, oh, you use thought experiments. It's like, no, dude. Like, what kind of thing is a philosophical question? What sort of questions even pass the philosophy test? Now again, this is a very vague kind of notion. But think about it this way, right? If I'm interested in that higher order version of the question, what is philosophical methodology? What I'm asking you is what's distinctive about philosophy as a subject? And if you tell me, oh, you use thought experiments, I'm like, no, that's not helping. This is answering the wrong kind of question. Do we see the difference? Again, I'm gesturing at something here, and I don't quite have it pinned down. But I hope we can kind of start to see the pull. The lower order ones are basically kind of like what we did in logic. This was me teaching you a particular tool that you can use to help you answer philosophical questions. But everything I taught you in formal logic does not help you answer that higher order version of the question. To answer that, what you already need to know is that this is the kind of question where logic is apt to be applied. Yeah.
So if I'm getting it correctly, you're pointing at something or gesturing something which you called Steve, but Steve in this case is just fuzzy, unknown, not specified.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, so another way to put what I'm trying to get with this distinction, the lower order ones are basically telling me, here's what's in the philosopher's toolkit. Here are the tools philosophers use. The higher order one is telling me something like, here are even the questions philosophers think they should be addressing. Come back to higher order, the possible existence of uncountable uncountable infinities. Is that a philosophical question? Could be. Answering that, or specifying why it is or isn't, that would be addressing something like a higher order methodological question. Why does it fall in the realm of a philosophical question? We were talking about geological questions, right? How was this volcano formed? Right? telling me why it is not a philosophical question, why this is an empirical one that can be sorted by looking at geological records. That explanation, not the explanation of what the records show, but why the records are the place to look. That is the kind of thing that's answering that higher order question. Why does this fall in the realm of geology rather than into philosophy? So what we're going to try and do is think about both of these senses. And I should stress, I put them in higher and lower, not to say the higher ones are more important, but it's just something like a level of abstraction. One of them is the tools that you use. One of them is, hey, when are these tools even appropriate? And one other thing to stress here is when we're thinking about methodology, and this is a point that, again, vibey, but I hope you'll go with me. There's a difference here between what we'll call philosophical method and style. So method is, for lack of a better term, the ways that philosophers act, right? The way that they go about answering questions or solving or even setting puzzles. Style is something more like form and manner of expression. As we will see in our reading, there are lots of people who have the same method who have radically different styles.
So a method you use to reach a goal,
Yeah.
and a style is more like who you are, expressing who you are.
Like how you get there, right? Like, yeah, I think that's fair. Something like this difference, right? It's the manner of the expression rather than what the expression really is. Again, there's a demarcation to be made here. What I'm trying to get at with this distinction between method and style is don't be confused. If someone uses particularly flowery language, if they never use 4 words when 40 will do, well, cool, that's their style. But that doesn't necessarily tell you anything about their philosophical method. As an example, one of the things that we'll look at next week is ordinary language philosophy. This is a particular approach to doing analytic philosophy, where you focus entirely on how the folk use language. A lot of people who do this write in a very, to my mind, annoying style. So many words to say very few things. I don't like the style, but I appreciate the method. The method is still the same. They're trying to offer, as we'll talk about in a minute, an analysis. Yeah.
Some styles do indicate a specific method, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So all I'm really trying to say is these are not the same.
Yeah.
There might be a tight relationship between some of them, but it's important that we keep conceptually the difference between methodology and style. That's all I really want to get at. And style might be a marker for a particular kind of method, might not. And maybe there's some cases where particular styles are locked to particular methods, maybe not. Don't mind. All I want to do is just drive a wedge between the two. Okay. So, what is philosophical methodology? It's the philosophical study of these philosophical methods. We can ask them in terms of what's in the toolkit, or we can also ask it in terms of, well, when is the toolkit even appropriate? Is this a genuine philosophical question? Now, it's worth noting that many philosophers have argued thinking about philosophical methodology is just not a good thing. So Ryle famously has this lovely quote, "Preoccupation with questions about methods tends to distract us from prosecuting the methods themselves. We run, as a rule, worse, not better, if we think a lot about our feet. So let us not speak of it at all, but just do it." Very Nike right there. Right? Similarly, Popper says a philosopher should philosophize. They should try to solve philosophical problems rather than talk about philosophy. So what's the kind of thought here? The thought is, well, look, worrying about philosophical methodology is the worst kind of navel gazing. It's philosophers just spiraling off, thinking about bullshit to think about bullshit. Because, again, I say this as a philosopher, we do have a problem with that. And there's something to this. There's something to this worry that, hey, if you spend your whole time thinking about how you will do something, you just never do it. So the best thing to do, says Ryle and Popper and many others, is to just go for it. And actually, I've already said something earlier that kind of suggests something like this. Remember, right at the top, I said, well, it's nice that you guys have had a year already of doing this kind of thing. At least a year doing this kind of thing. Because it's good to get your hands dirty first. Have a little experience. Another metaphor here, right? It's not very useful to think about how to ride a bicycle. The best thing to do is just get on the damn thing and see what happens. There's something to this. Now, of course, as a philosophical argument, this and €2 will get you a cup of coffee. Well, not even €2 anymore, more than that. Because this is not very much of a philosophical argument. But it's still worth taking seriously. So why should we actually be interested in philosophical methodology? Why is this a subject worthy of our attention? Why is this a subject worthy of a whole damn class for a semester? Let's start off with a really simple argument. We even call it an argument. There is a branch, a subdiscipline in philosophy that's called metaphilosophy, aka the philosophy of philosophy. This is the philosophical investigation of philosophy as a subject. Topics include the aims. Is it aimed after truth? Is it aimed after figuring out necessities? Is it aimed after conceptual clarity? The limitations of philosophy. How far can it get us? What can it do? What can't it do? And hey, here's the other bit that it does. It talks about the methods. So one reason to think about philosophical methodology is, well, it's already being done. It's there. So we might as well think about it. Again, that's not going to get you very far, but it's something. To kind of stretch it out, we can say that, look, metaphilosophy is part of the big philosophical projects, trademark, registered, etc., etc., etc. That is, understanding everything, understanding how the world is in some big sense. Which I think, if we maybe step back a little bit, I certainly thought that was one of the reasons I got into philosophy. I wanted to know how the world works in some way. And I didn't want to do that much math, so I didn't do physics. I did philosophy instead. Put another way, we can say, what is philosophy? Is one of the fundamental questions of philosophy. We want to know as philosophers about knowledge and understanding and how to attain them. Thus, we ask the same sort of questions about philosophy itself as we would, what is knowledge? What is good? What's justice? It's just more grist to the philosophical mill. So that gives us one reason to be interested in philosophical methodology. Again, not the strongest one, but it's an interest. A slightly more, I think, potent argument for being interested in philosophical methodology comes when we think about two related questions. The first question, I like to think of it as a unification challenge. So we can put it this way. What, if anything, unifies philosophy as a subject? This is sort of close to what I asked you at the top, right? What is philosophy? What's philosophy as a subject? What makes it such that all the people who are studying philosophy are studying the same subject? if they are. There's a lurking if they are there. Is it topic? What do we think? Is there anything like a unity of topic? Here's a quick way to check. Think back over the courses you've had over the previous year. Was there really one topic that kind of ran through all of them? Be interested if there was. That'd be really cool. I suspect the answer there is no. Or it's going to be at such a level of abstraction that it's going to just be like, we think about stuff? Okay, cool. That's true for everybody, my dude. That's not going to be enough to narrow it down. Do we see the problem? So the topic stuff doesn't look like it's going to give us an answer to the unification challenge, if we think we need an answer. We instead might turn to philosophical method. Maybe this is going to be what unifies philosophy as a subject. Maybe the thing that unites, to pick the 4 people who might teach this class, right? Adriana, Gregor, Catherine, and myself, in terms of subject, is that we all very broadly are engaged in something like the same methodological practices. We certainly don't think about the same stuff. If that's right, then we have a reason to think about philosophical methodology. It's going to help us answer this question. What the hell is philosophy? And that seems like an interesting project. So the unification challenge, cool, nice to have an answer. Here's another challenge, related, but I think even more important. Probably one you've already asked yourselves while you were reading or thinking about philosophy. Call it the evaluation challenge. How do you do philosophy well? You've already run into this because you've taken exams. You've also probably run into this when you've read something and you've thought, this is shit. So, how do you tell when something is good or bad philosophy? And actually, let me step back. I don't want to put it in terms of good or bad. How can you tell when philosophy is being done well or being done poorly? That looks like a really important question if we're going to be engaged in the subject at all. And it seems really obvious that answering this kind of question is going to require specifying something about method. How can you tell that this carpenter is done well? Well, you talk about the way it was put together, how well it stands up. You think about the purposes and aims that it was designed for, the route that was run through to achieve it. Methodology is going to be a key part in answering something like this evaluation challenge. Now, of course, you might think, hey, there is no good answer here. Yeah, please.
Yeah, it doesn't, well, doing philosophy well with the classes we have and the philosophers we discuss, they do philosophy well, otherwise we would not. So does it not filter itself out that poor philosophy will always be?
And in the best way, my dude, are you telling me that everybody you've read did philosophy well?
Not to my opinion.
Good, but okay, so this is already highlighting, I think, something why this question's so important, right? If we don't have a good answer to this question, it all just becomes the Big Lebowski. That's just your opinion, man. Right? And cool, if that's what we're doing, well, we don't need to be in class anymore. So this again, kind of, if we think that there's something like doing it well or doing it badly, there needs to be some kind of story about the method. Yeah.
Is it always that the method is that important for figuring out if the result is, because I can see a piece of art being made in the most shittiest of ways and still be decent art.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I think what we got to be careful there. So art's a particularly tricky one. It depends on how you think about the nature of art. If you're just thinking about the product, and that is the only thing that we assess when we look at a work of art, then the method isn't going to matter. But you could have, at least in theory, 2 visually identical pieces that have radically different aesthetic properties. a very jokey one from Arthur Danto is it's just a big red square. And then next to it, you have another big red square. One of them was painted by a Soviet anti-Marxist painter who's titled it Red Square, and he's making a political commentary about it. One of them was painted by an Egyptian painter. It's called Moses Crosses the Red Sea, and it's after the seas have collapsed back and crushed all of the Egyptians, and it's about tragedies in Palestine, things like this. Product is the same, but something about the method and the history here actually tells you the different aesthetic features. So it can play a role, doesn't always.
And the reason why they made it is part of the method in this case.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the reasons why they do it will feed into how. Good question. Okay, yes.
These methods, how do they come about?
Good question. So that's actually one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about. Like as we roll along, when I talk about, say, next week, the logical empiricist method, there's a particular kind of historical reason that these dudes came to the approach that they did. Same thing for ordinary language philosophy. A lot of these times, it's going to be historical accident. But not always. Sometimes it's brought back because it's particularly effective. Or people have found that when they think about it, this is actually just a really good way to go. It's a good question. Something to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we tick along. Okay. So, again, the thought here is basically like if we feel the unification and evaluation challenges, if we think these are challenges to be met, then doing philosophical methodology is probably a very good way to address them. These give us philosophical reasons, whatever the hell philosophical reasons are, but it looks like these are them, gives us philosophical reasons for doing philosophical methodology, contra Ryle and Popper that we saw earlier with the nation. Okay. The last kind of argument for thinking about philosophical methodology comes from the little bit of reading that we were doing for today. So I want to just read it, and we'll talk a little bit about it. So this is from Overgaard et al.'s little chapter. So they say, if the critics of the traditional methods here being something like using thought experiments, using propositional logic, right, that sort of lower level methodology stuff that we talked about earlier. If the critics of the traditional methods are right, then the way most of us go about solving philosophical problems is in fact radically inadequate to the task. In other words, if the critics are right, then this affects philosophy across the board. Epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy of science, moral and political philosophy, and so on and so forth are all affected insofar as philosophers working in these areas employ the method under criticism. Surely, any criticism that affects philosophy across the board in such a way is philosophically important, indeed crucial. So before we take our break, let's pause and look at this. And maybe first question is, what do we think the argument here is? What's the claim being made? Yeah.
That if some methodologies turn out to be bad methodologies and people are using them, and that's clearly relevant to philosophy. So we need to take a look at what are good and bad methodologies to make sure that people are doing good philosophy, or are doing philosophy good.
That's fair. Doing well, right? Okay. Fair? Yes.
Seems like a combination of the unification challenge and the evaluation challenge, because, like you said, doing it well then affects everything, which is the unification.
I think that seems clear. Other thoughts on this? I have to confess, when I read it, I was kind of baffled. I felt like it was just addressing a different kind of question. in the sense that this seems to be more interested in to talk about the lower and higher orders. This seems to be a point about the lower order questions, but I took the challenge to be basically that we shouldn't bother with the higher order ones. We see the difference here that I'm after? Take the very beginning, right? Take the very beginning of the quote here. They're talking about using methods like proposing thought experiments or using propositional logic or something like this. And saying if those are bad, then the philosophy done by them is bad. Again, what you were saying, which is fair, cool. But in some sense, to make that claim already, you are admitting that methodology is something serious. So if I don't like methodology, if I'm Ryle or Popper or somebody like this, that conditional is vacuous. Conditional is vacuous. I don't want to play this kind of game. I don't even want to be involved in the kind of claim that you're trying to get me to buy into. It's a really subtle little point there. But I have to confess that I just wasn't moved by this argument. That's why I sort of formulated the unification and evaluation challenges distinctly. It wasn't clear to me what exactly Overgaard here was after. But something to think about, I think, going forward. So, what we've seen, at least, is 3 reasons, I think, for being interested in philosophical methodology. The first one, the cheap one, it's part of the big philosophical project. It's yet more grist to our philosophical mill. The one that I find most interesting or most convincing is it looks like we have to do this in order to answer something like unification and evaluation challenges. If we take those seriously, then methodology needs to be in our business too. And then there's the kind of argument from Overgaard there. Maybe that just collapses back. I'm not sure. Now, one thing to ask is, can we think of other potential reasons? Other reasons why we might think that philosophical methodology is something fruitful, worth spending our time on.
Consistency.
Tell me more.
Because like if you want like let's say we want all the philosophers to work with consistency, I don't know, with the same quality of thoughts, or I don't know, like when I study philosophy at Tilburg Uni and someone studies it in Amsterdam, there's like a case of minimal skills you can do as a philosopher. So you want that consistency, right? You don't want like to go to a different school and that the skills you learn are totally different than some other philosopher, and then, you know.
Yeah, I kind of see the idea. I think there's a couple things to tease out here. One is seem to be blurring that subject-discipline distinction, right? So some of the stuff you were saying targeted that notion of philosophy as a discipline, but I always want to talk just about the like capital P, the subject, right? Where you can do philosophy without ever going to university or anything like that. Right? That's one thing. But fair point. The second thing to kind of say there is it seems like that's kind of, again, coming at that second point, the sort of unification and evaluation. What is it that we're all doing, and what sorts the doing it well from what are you doing there? But I take it. I like it. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's the same as the second one, but maybe even without the world around you, for yourself to have a guidance along which you can do philosophy, so you're not like grasping in the big unknown.
Yeah. I mean, just sort of flailing around, throwing darts at a board, right? That's not necessarily a good way to build a philosophical system. Yeah, I think that's kind of fair. And again, you might think this is a version, a slightly more localized version of something like the second bullet point, but yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Maybe some sort of ethical perspective, that some methods are well, maybe they bring harm to others in some sort of way. To study that and to know which ones are best and don't bring harm or are fruitious for our common good.
I think that's a nice point. So nothing I've really kind of said so far here says much about the ethical or political implications of the methods. It's just been pure raw thought. And there might be good reasons to worry about philosophical methodology in those cases too, or for those consequences too. Okay. So just something to kind of think about. So what we're going to do next, we'll take our little break. Oh no, I'm sorry. We were going to push through, weren't we? How was
Let's
that?
vote. Let's vote.
Yeah. What do people want? Do people want to take a break, or do we want to keep on going?
I'd like to read from my water.
Yeah, I need to keep break.
All right, we'll take it. We'll take a 10-minute break. It's okay. And then so
Do like this, but fair enough.
we'll come back at 48. Okay. So 10 minutes.